Last week, the embattled opposition leader, Anthony Albanese, also known as the Stephen Bradbury of prime ministerial politics, was asked, "Can men have babies?" He answered no, and from there stirred up a hornet's nest from the woke in the community for whom his party is now the lead advocate. So I thought it was appropriate to consider what wokeism is all about in an age where I too, as an opponent of Anthony Albanese, happen to agree with him on this one point. And so I'd like to address wokeism and the idea that men cannot have babies. So it comes down to detail, and that's the point. It really is the woke's belief that they can hijack language for the sake of inclusion, but at the exact same time exclude the unvaccinated for their belief in informed consent or the right to bodily autonomy or the right to choose or the right to perform due diligence or parents' rights or the right to refuse experimental medication, and I bet there are many more. But a biological male cannot have a baby. Yet, but I bet the mad scientists are working on it. However, I agree with Albo, but just this once. But on economy, you will never be a Hawke-Keating government. They were the best Liberal government the Liberals never had. Unfortunately, the rest of Albanese's platform conforms to wokeism. Big spending, short-sighted, microscopic incrementalism on new knowledge, but massive movement on the woke agenda. Climate change, net zero by 2050. But at what cost? And why don't the people get to know that? You can model anything these days. Why is it that the woke who led this march have not thought about that? Is it because they don't worry about the price anymore, or the costs, or the livelihoods lost, or the home values dropped, the mortgages, when they're worth more than the equity in a freshly minted ghost town? In Paterson and the Hunter electorates, tens of thousands of residents derive their incomes from the mines, many, many more from related industries. Think of the machinery, the retail, the accommodation, the hospitality industry, and the list goes on. You don't get to fantasize about a green era without considering the price and the costs of most certainly without having the debate, instead of just hijacking the issue. If the situation was really that in peril, the government would act like it did with the virus, swiftly, completely, under virtual martial law. Before we do that again and accept any old price, like the $1.4 trillion in government debt levels today, and that accounts for $55,000 or more for every single living Australian today, up from just $4,000 in government debt per capita pre-COVID. Back then, we used to call for a surplus at election time. Who remembers that? Instead, we must take stock where cool heads prevail and hold this and compliant governments to account. For example, why do the world's two largest polluters, China and India, get to keep polluting while Australians start paying climate or carbon taxes? And again, at what price and when will this price be set? If you really are a greenie, how do you explain lithium mining and 7-year battery recycling? How do you ignore industrial hemp? How do you ignore a plant with the ability to mop up contaminated land at the same time improving the soil, which is capable of creating over 1,500 different products today, including food, fuel, building materials, clothing, medicine, and motor cars, capable of being grown and processed into products at the farm? That means primary and secondary industries, decentralized and job creating. It's clean, abundant, and superior, and certainly over wind farms and solar, which only can do energy production. Why not just let them compete against each other? The thing is, hemp is hard to corporatize. That should light up any greenie's eyes. Only the greenies don't seem to be interested. See, the new green voter was educated in the era of wokeism, and therefore we need to introduce a brand new term called woke idealism. So now we have two different sets of greenies. You might want to call them dark and light. The older, mature crowd are part of the dark group, and the younger, hyperactive group, the light greenies. You see, only the dark greenies are bothered and get it. Hemp presents a perfect opportunity, as does most of this new emerging industry, and they are financially astute, financially aware, they're motivated, and they're interested. Approaching retirement age, people are very concerned about how they're going to pay for the rest of their lives. The light greenies, though, are hooked into corporate simplicity, to the idea that authority can help for all the work the younger set have done to get the government to put green issues front and centre. If only we can just get them to help us, at any cost. Does that remind you of something? Oh, they will help, all right, on the government and corporations' own terms. World Economic Forum, anyone? UN Agenda 2030. Yet no one on the woke side seems to notice, and when pointed out, they don't care because trust authority. They would never harm us and only use the best available information. Yet, how many times have they got it wrong? Led and marketed by a globalist agenda, guided and subsidized by taxpayer money and borrowed money from the government, controlled by corporations who reap the profits and who get permission from the government in a self-fulfilling prophecy, sold to us as safer wherever possible. It's always that way. The problem with government idealism is that it's not ideal because the government always gets its way. Wokeism can hijack any idea. It can change definitions, but it cannot change chromosomes. It cannot change biology. Biology by evolution is natural, and the same biology that is also believed to have come from God. So if one wishes to change it, for whatever reason, one has to accept that this is human alteration, even if the person's belief that it was a biological error. So if a woman transitions to a man, that man would now have a womb. But what happens if a man transitions to a woman? Does that woman have a womb? And shouldn't the woke introduce a term for this outcome? The understanding of the unknown can at best be at first tolerated and then understood, scientifically evaluated and explained. If it is unexplainable or oversimplified, then it must be adjusted. This is the counterpunch to political correctness as it is in 2022. Civilized discussions resulting in understanding and consensus. Anthony Albanese said that men cannot have babies. I agree. The woke say that they can. So the woke likely have to cancel Albo, or they have double standards, meaning they are full of shit. Or we talk. Signed, Jason Alborn, part of The Awake. And the definitions are these. Woke, this is the way it is, get used to it, no questions asked. The awake, the way it really is, but all questions asked. This election of 2022 can be decided by two teams, woke versus the awake, or for another way of explaining it, globalism versus freedom. I'm Jason Alborn.